Previously with the signing sheriff.
Why in the world did people come up with this idea that people's spirits get stuck on Earth and we can see these things? Because they had to come up with some sort of explanation as to why these things are happening. Now, something else that I wanted to point out, simply because it goes along with this premise. And by the way, I'm typing into my Bible app so I can find the verse again. I can't remember where it was. I looked it up. I know it's in 1 Samuel, but I don't remember exactly where. Oh, there we go. Okay, it's in 1 Samuel chapter 28. Now, here is basically what I think is occurring. Now, I'm not going to, because like I said, I don't believe in ghosts. However, I have seen enough evidence to believe that every once in a blue moon, there is paranormal activity. Most paranormal activity that I find on YouTube, I can easily debunk it if I wanted to. Obviously, I don't have enough equipment and editing gear to sit down and prove what I would debunk otherwise, because I'm not a technology whiz who has a bunch of editing apps I can use to show what people do in their videos. Other people that I have seen on YouTube have done a good enough job of doing that. I don't view it as being necessary. But one thing that many people on YouTube don't seem to, or actually I should say none of the people on YouTube seem to know about, is a concept that I believe is what's going on in any paranormal activity that is actually paranormal activity. Not people staging things for internet clout. And that is the concept of familiar spirits. Though I will say not necessarily specifically familiar spirits. Now, what the concept of a familiar spirit is, excuse me, is when it actually is a familiar spirit. It's a person who can communicate with a demonic entity. Like I said, the spirits of the deceased are not stuck anywhere. So communicating with the spirits of the deceased is out of the question. What a familiar spirit talker, if you want to call it that, nowadays we would call them a medium. What they do, if they actually have supernatural abilities, which modern day mediums don't, it's almost all stage effects. But way back in the day, if a medium or a person with familiar spirits, is what they were called, actually was genuinely had the ability to communicate with familiar spirits, what they were actually doing was they were communicating with a demonic presence disguised for the benefit of the person talking to them as someone they recognized. Because if you saw an actual demon, you probably wouldn't want to go back to the medium. So that's what was typically actually happened. Somebody came to a familiar spirit because they wanted to communicate with the loved one. The demonic presence would appear as the loved one and they would communicate with them. However, in 1 Samuel 28 is the only recorded time ever recorded that somebody spoke with a spirit of a deceased person. Obviously, that being Samuel. Now, why do I bring this up? Because many people believe that the Bible, because it gives this particular occurrence, I don't want to call it story because that's not what it is, it's an occurrence. Because some people believe that because the Bible gives this occurrence, that means that spirits do linger. Well, yes and no. Because remember what I said about Abraham's bosom basically being like what some people could think of as a heaven's version of purgatory? In a manner of speaking, you could refer to that as lingering. I wouldn't. But what is remarkable is that this particular situation, in this situation, let me just go up to the verses and start reading it so you understand what's going on. This is 1 Samuel chapter 28, verse 1. And it came to pass in those days that the Philistines, and yes, I pronounce it Philistines, not Philistines, or Philistines, because I actually know how to pronounce it properly. But anywho, that the Philistines gathered their armies together for warfare to fight with Israel. And Achish, or something like that, said unto David, Know thou assuredly that thou shalt go out with me to battle, thou and thy men. And David said to Achish, I'm going to call him that. This is one of those names I don't know how to say. Sure thou shalt know what thy servant can do. And Achish said to David, Therefore will I make thee keeper of mine head forever. Doesn't really make much of a difference, but I wanted to start at the beginning of the chapter. Now, on to what actually is important to this. Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had lamented him, and buried him in Ramah, even in his own city. I believe that's located in Gilead, but I'm not entirely sure. My geography is horrible. And Saul had put away those that had familiar spirits, and the wizards out of the land. Now, something that I never noticed until quite recently, and I think is actually kind of funny, or convenient, whatever you want to call it. Why does the Bible specify Saul had put away those that had familiar spirits and the wizards? It doesn't stop with had familiar spirits. It includes wizards. Well, here's the really weird thing about Bible times. Guess what people with familiar spirits always were? Women. People with familiar spirits were always women. I have no idea why. But you never saw a person with a familiar spirit being a man. That was known as a wizard. Like I said, I have no idea why that is. But that's why they specified it, because he put away the men and the women who dealt in black magic. It's basically what they're saying. But they're saying it in the way that people back then would understand it. He had put away those that had familiar spirits, the women, and the wizards, the men, out of the land. But anyway, that out of the way. And the Philistines gathered themselves together and came and pitched in Shunem, I believe. And Saul gathered all Israel together, and they pitched at Gilboa. And when Saul saw the host of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart greatly trembled. And when Saul inquired of the Lord, which I believe is going to the temple or the tabernacle and praying, I think either that or it means that he went to his room and started trying to pray and asking God for help. The Lord answered him not. I shouldn't be laughing at right now, but it is kind of funny. But anywho, neither by dreams nor by Urim nor by the prophets. Now, something that I've always thought was funny about this particular situation is, if you know anything about Bible concepts, you'll recognize the term Urim. The Urim and the Thummim, I believe it's pronounced, were, I think they were stones. They were two objects kept in the priest's clothing. Special objects that somehow or another were used to answer important questions without having to go directly to God. But something that I think is really amusing here is people have two basic opinions that I have been made aware of as to what the Urim and the Thummim are. And this particular verse kind of debunks those a little bit. So some people have said that the Urim and the Thummim were a yes and no question system. Meaning, you have these two rocks in a bag. One of them means yes, one of them means no. You ask it a question that has to be answered as yes or no. You reach into the bag, and whichever one you pull out is your answer. Okay. And then you've also got these people that think that the Urim and the Thummim were used like a Ouija board. Though I'm not entirely sure how that works exactly, because it's a Urim and a Thummim, two objects. A Ouija board is operated by a single sliding doohickey. I don't know what that sliding contraption is called because I've never used a Ouija board. But whatever you call that weird teardrop, pointer thing, there's only one of them. So how would you use two objects that are made out of stone as a Ouija board? So that's the first debunker. The second one is, how do you use a single stone as a yes or no questionnaire device? You'd always get the same answer, regardless of what you ask it. But that's a separate issue. Just something I wanted to throw in there because I think it's funny. Nor by prophets. Then said Saul unto his servants, Seek me a woman that hath a familiar spirit, that I may go to her and inquire of her. Now, this is something interesting. Like I said, the person that hath a familiar spirit was always a woman. And the other version was called a wizard. So I don't know why Saul is specifying a woman that hath a familiar spirit. Other than the fact that he assumes that if he goes to a man, the man might be able to fight back if something ends up going wrong. Women back then were not necessarily very good at defending themselves or fighting. Now, there are some obvious exceptions to that, and the exceptions are extremely good at fighting. But the general public was not good at fighting, so I'm pretty sure he wanted a woman that had a familiar spirit because he didn't want her to be able to fight back if something went wrong. And his servants said to him, Behold, there is a woman that hath a familiar spirit at Endor, which is where we get the oh-so-famous concept of the Witch of Endor. Now, I don't know if I would call her a witch because a witch isn't necessarily automatically going to be a person with a familiar spirit or vice versa. So I wouldn't call her the Witch of Endor. I'd call her the Woman of Endor. But that's a separate issue. And Saul disguised himself, obviously, because he outlawed them, and put on other raiment, which, by the way, there's so many little subtle details in these videos I think is hilarious. It says, and Saul disguised himself and put on other raiment. I believe that those are two separate concepts. Not only did he put on other raiment, which means clothing, I believe the disguised himself comment is the Bible referring to his face and hair. He didn't just put a cloak on and flip the hood up. He actually did something to his face to try to make himself unrecognizable. But, anywho, and he went and two men with him, and they came to the woman by night. And he said, I pray thee, divine unto me. And by the way, divine is a word that basically means fortune tell. And we have evidence of this in Genesis, I believe, where Joseph says, didn't you know that a man like me can divine? Which means he fortune told and figured out that they were the ones that stole his cup. But that's a separate issue. Divine unto me by the familiar spirit. And yes, I'm giggling because if you know the details of the story, you know how keen on detail the Bible is, and how amusing this situation kind of is. Divine unto me by the familiar spirit. He's telling her exactly what he wants to happen. And the Bible is pointing these details out because people back then, because people back then are ridiculously specific with what they say. And B, because they want to make a contrast between what he asked her to do and what ended up actually happening, and make it as funny as they possibly could. He told her to do this is what ended up happening, and that explains her reaction and his. But anywho, and bring me up whom I shall name unto thee. Another one of those little tidbits of information that I think is kind of funny. The punctuation in this particular verse. And he said, comma, I pray thee, comma, divine unto me by the familiar spirit, comma, and bring me up, comma, whom I shall name unto thee. I can't for the life of me fathom why there's a comma between the bring me him up and the whom I shall name unto thee. It makes them two separate thoughts. Anywho, I'm going to skip part of this. The woman basically complains at him because she knows that she's illegal. And why are you trying to get me to do something illegal? I'm going to get in trouble. So he basically tells her, nothing's going to happen to you, I promise. Then, in verse 11, then said the woman, whom shall I bring up unto thee? And he said, bring me up Samuel. Now, this is important to note. Then said the woman, whom shall I bring up unto thee? She asks it like that because she, in her line of work, she would have to communicate to the demonic presence, the demon, as it's what it really is. She'd have to communicate with the demon who he's supposed to make himself look like. So she has to ask out loud who he's supposed to bring up. And he said, bring me up Samuel. And when the woman saw Samuel, she cried with a loud voice. And the woman spake to Saul, saying, why hast thou deceived me, for thou art Saul? Now, this is a very interesting little interchange, because there's so much detail that nobody seems to notice about this particular interchange that explains part of the reason why I can tell what's actually happening and how God actually allowed her to do what she pretended to do for once in her life. So it says, and when the woman saw Samuel, she cried with a loud voice, which is basically her screaming. So she was freaked out. First way I know for a fact that God gave her the one-time ability to actually bring up the spirit that she was supposed to bring up, because she never expected it to actually work. When she saw the actual spirit, she totally lost it, because she was familiar, no pun intended with the word familiar there, with what her little demonic entity looked like. So the fact that she brings up the actual spirit of Samuel and freaks out says that she never expected to bring up the actual person. So God gave her the ability to bring up Samuel's actual spirit. The other way that I know for a fact that God gave her that ability is her reaction, not the screaming part. What she says to Saul. And the woman spake to Saul, saying, why hast thou deceived me, for thou art Saul? As soon as she realized that she had brought up the actual spirit of Samuel, she realized that it was Saul, because she knew what I do. God would not give me this ability to actually bring up the real spirit of Samuel, unless this guy is actually Saul trying to figure out information from Samuel. So she instantly realized, because this spirit popped up and is actually the spirit of Samuel, That's got to be Saul, because there's no other reason why God would allow me to bring him up. Now, here's the funny part, and this is what the thing I think is the most funny about this situation. Verse 13, and the king said unto her, be not afraid, for what sawest thou? So, now, here's how you could hear it. There's two possible ways to hear this statement in modern term vernacular. You could hear it by Saul saying this, oh, don't be scared. I mean, what did you just see? Which is him saying, you did what you were supposed to do. Why are you freaking out? Or you could hear it like this, don't be scared. I mean, come on, what did you see? As him being reassuring, not him saying, oh, come on, you idiot. Now, why do I think he is basically trying to reassure her in her own ability? Because of the word for. I'm pretty sure the way he worded this, be not afraid, for what sawest thou, is him stating a rhetorical question, trying to get her to realize, hey, it worked. What are you freaking out for? You did what you were supposed to do. Now, here's this really weird part. Second half of verse 13. And the woman said unto Saul, I saw gods ascending out of the earth. And he said unto her, what form is he of? Okay, what the doggone is going on here? She says, I saw gods, lowercase g, plural, ascending, meaning rising up out of the earth. So why does Saul instantly ask, what form is he of? Well, she said gods, plural. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense why the singular versus plural changes from one person to the next. Except for the fact that what the woman is seeing, and I'm very sure that what the woman was seeing was a bunch of demonic presence, multiple demonic presences, rising out of the earth, which obviously the earth is where hell is located. So I believe she was seeing demonic presences rising up out of hell. Now, Saul basically ignored that because he remembered that she had just seen a spirit. So he asked, what form is he of? So I believe that the transition from plural gods to singular he is Saul redirecting her focus back to what she was supposed to be doing. And then basically they go into this whole rigmarole of him talking to Samuel after she explains what's going on. He decides, okay, yep, it's confirmed, that's Samuel. Why do I bring all this up? Because it's evidence of what actually happens. God, this is the only time that a spirit of an actual deceased person is recorded in the Bible. And her reaction shows that she wasn't expecting that to happen at all. She freaked out. So I wholeheartedly believe that this is all the evidence that is needed to say that this whole idea that ghosts are the spirits of people who get stuck, wrong. Spirits or ghosts are paranormal entities, which I would call demons, who are... Now, let me clarify this a little bit. Why do I think that they're demonic presences? Because I met a man who was very much into the paranormal. I'm not going to name him, but what I will say is this was a man who lived in the Reformers Better Roads Recovery Ministry home. They don't call it the RU, even though technically speaking, get over it, that's what it is. That's the RU home for men in Hammond, Indiana. He was one of the residents there. When I first met him, he was just coming back into the home after being gone for a while. He was, at that moment, high on marijuana, I believe. It was either that or he was high on something else, but he was high at the moment. He was the type of person that, because he was big into paranormal activity, if he was high, he would see demonic entities. And when I first met him, I was sitting in the dining room, a few tables away from him, watching him, because I was interested in what he was doing. He periodically would look over into the corner of the room and tell something across the room to shut up and get away from him. Obviously, I couldn't see anything. Later, when he was a little bit more in himself, I asked him to describe what it was he saw. He told me he saw something basically like the Minotaur. This big bull-like thing that was standing on 2 feet. Does that sound at all familiar? Obviously, I'm not referring to mythology, but something bull-like standing on 2 feet is ridiculously reminiscent of the concept that kids have of what Satan looks like. And later on, he basically accused me of simping with him, trying to get on his good side, because I was telling him I believed that he saw this entity. And I told him what I'm about to tell you. I have no problem whatsoever believing that some people can see paranormal activity, can see paranormal entities, can see demonic entities, so on and so forthwith. Because the devil wants to keep Christians as far away from God as he possibly can. And as I worded it to this individual, if the devil can keep you away from God by allowing you to see his minions, he's not going to have any problem doing that. Hey, I've got multiple, many minions. If I can keep this guy from being close to God by allowing him to see one of my minions every once in a while, hey, sweet, go bug that guy every once in a while. Now, I would have been a little bit more freaked out if I had seen some sort of paranormal activity, such as something falling over while he was nearby. I obviously didn't. But still, it doesn't negate the fact this guy had an unnatural connection with the spirit world, if you want to call it that. So, long story short of what this entire video was meant to do, I do not believe in ghosts. I do not believe there is such thing as ghost activity. But I do believe that every once in a while, you can experience paranormal, which basically means above normal or not normal activity as a result of demonic activity. But I believe that those only occur to keep people from God. So, I don't believe that most things on YouTube are paranormal at all. I believe they're staged the majority of the time. But every once in a while, you'll find one that actually is really good. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. And happy trails.